The wagon wheels churned dust into the twilight, each groan of wood and iron slicing deeper into the silence. Emily stood barefoot on the trail, her toes curling into the cool earth, clutching the last piece of bread they had pressed into her palm. Her family, not by blood, never by choice, had kissed her forehead, their lips cold as the promise they broke, and ridden away without a backward glance. The wind carried the tang of pine and betrayal, and the fading clatter of hooves left only her heartbeat to fill the void. She was 10 years old, and her name, once spoken in half-hearted duty, was now a ghost no one called. She did not chase them. Chasing, she had learned, brought only bruises and the same empty truth. She was the extra one, a burden too heavy for a family stretched thin by hunger and indifference. Emily sank to her knees, the bread crumbling between her fingers, her eyes dry but burning like coals in a dying fire. The trail stretched endless before her, a ribbon of dirt flanked by pines that whispered secrets she could not decipher. She pulled her knees to her chest, her patched dress snagging on a twig, and counted the ants marching in neat rows across the earth. She named them, Sarah, Thomas, Grace, giving them the family she no longer had. The sun crawled lower, painting the sky in streaks of amber and bruise, and she wondered if it, too, felt abandoned when night came. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes, she could not tell. Time had become a weight, heavy as the silence where her name used to live. She did not expect rescue. Kindness was a story told to other children, not to girls left like forgotten sacks of grain. Yet, as the light bled from the sky, a new sound pierced the quiet. The measured thud of hooves, deliberate, not rushed. Emily's head snapped up, her heart a startled bird in her chest. A rider emerged from the trees, his silhouette sharp against the fading sun. He rode a horse as dark as coal, its coat gleaming like polished obsidian. The man was not dusty or gaunt like the travelers she knew. His broad shoulders filled a clean jacket, and his eyes, when they found her, were steady, sizing her up like a merchant weighing a deal. "Are you lost?" His voice was low, gravel over stone, carrying neither pity nor judgment. Emily shook her head, her braids swinging against her back. "No. Left." He tilted his head, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face. "Anyone coming back for you?" "No." "You have a name?" "Emily." The word felt foreign, a thing she had not spoken in days. The man did not smile, but something in his expression shifted like a door cracking open to let in light. He leaned forward, his saddle creaking, and reached into a leather bag strapped to his horse. He pulled out a wrapped biscuit and a small tin of water, holding them out without ceremony. Emily stared, her fingers tightening around the crumbs in her hand. Why would a stranger stop? Why would he care? She searched his face for a trick, for the cruelty she had learned to expect, but found only patience. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice was small, barely louder than the wind. He met her gaze, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Because someone should have helped me once." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through her. He did not ask her to follow. He simply waited, his horse shifting beneath him, its breath a soft cloud in the cooling air. Emily stood slowly, her legs unsteady, the biscuit still clutched in her hand. She did not know where he was going or what he wanted, but he had stopped. That was enough. She took a step, then another, her bare feet silent on the trail. He turned his horse with a gentle nudge, nodding once. "Let us go, Emily." She followed, not because she trusted him, she did not know how to trust, but because he was the first person who had spoken her name like it mattered. The trail wound through the pines, the air growing sharper as night crept closer. Emily's arms tightened around herself each time a shadow flickered in the trees, her eyes darting to the man ahead. He rode with a quiet confidence, his back straight, never glancing back to check if she followed. His silence was not cold, not like the family's had been. It was simply there, leaving space for her own. The journey stretched long, the rhythm of hooves lulling her fears into a fragile calm. When they crested a final ridge, the sight stole her breath. Below lay a house, not a shack or a bunkhouse, but a real home, its white fence glowing faintly under the rising moon. A barn stood to one side, its red paint chipped but proud, and two porches wrapped the house like arms. No lanterns burned, no voices called. It was empty, save for the man who had brought her here. "You live here?" Emily's voice was a whisper, afraid to break the stillness. "Yes, alone." He dismounted, his boots stirring the dust, and reached up to lift her down. His hands were careful, as if he knew she might not trust the ground beneath her. She landed softly, her eyes wide, still holding the biscuit he had given her hours ago. He opened the front door without knocking, the hinges sighing. Emily hesitated on the threshold, waiting for orders, for rules about where to sit or what not to touch. None came. "Pick a room," he said, his voice steady. "They are all empty." Emily stepped inside, her bare feet cold against the polished wood. The house smelled of cedar and wax, its walls lined with shelves and faded photographs. She wandered the hallway, her steps tentative, like a thief in a sacred place. Every room held furniture, curtains, rugs that felt too fine to tread on. Upstairs, she found a bedroom with a quilt folded at the foot of a bed, its window framing a sky now studded with stars. She sat on the edge, the mattress soft beneath her, and looked at the biscuit in her hand. It was real. This was real. The man appeared in the doorway, a stack of folded clothes in his arms. "They are big but clean." She nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you." He set the clothes on the bed and turned to leave, pausing only to say, "I am James Brooks." The name settled in her chest, heavy but not crushing. He walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. Emily pulled on a too large shirt, its sleeves swallowing her hands, and slipped beneath the quilt. The dark wrapped around her, but for the first time, it did not feel like punishment. It felt like rest. The morning sun spilled through the window, painting the quilt in shades of gold and rose. Emily lay still, her breath shallow, afraid to disturb the quiet that held her like a promise. The bed did not creak or sag beneath her weight, a strangeness that made her wonder if she was dreaming. The scent of frying meat drifted upstairs, sharp and warm, pulling her from the haze of sleep. She sat up, the oversized shirt slipping off one shoulder, and pressed her bare feet to the cool floorboards. The biscuit from the trail sat on the bedside table, untouched, a reminder of the man who had stopped when no one else had. Downstairs, James Brooks stood at the stove, his back to her, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron pan. The kitchen was a marvel of order. Glass jars of flour and sugar lined the shelves. A copper kettle gleamed on the counter, and a window framed the pasture where dew sparkled like scattered coins. Emily hesitated in the doorway, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt, waiting for a command or a dismissal. James did not look up. "Do you eat eggs?" His voice was steady, the same gravelly calm as the night before. She nodded, then realized he could not see her. "Yes." "Are you allergic to anything?" She shook her head, her braid brushing her back. "No." He slid a plate toward the second chair at the table, where a fork and a tin cup already waited. "Then sit." Emily obeyed, her movements cautious, as if the chair might vanish beneath her. The plate held 2 eggs, sunny and steaming, alongside a slice of bacon and a thick piece of bread. She stared, her stomach twisting with hunger she had learned to ignore. James sat across from her, his own plate simple, and began to eat without ceremony. He did not ask where she came from, what had happened, or why her eyes darted to the door at every creak of the house. His silence was a gift, the kindest thing he could have offered. They ate without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the distant call of a rooster. When she finished, James poured her a cup of milk, its creaminess foreign on her tongue. He leaned back, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. "I am heading out to check the north fence. You can stay here or ride with me. I will not leave you alone unless you say it is all right." Emily blinked, her fingers tightening around the cup. People did not ask what she wanted. They told her what was next, where to stand, what to carry. The choice felt like a weight, but not a burden. "I will ride," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. He nodded once and rose, clearing the plates. Emily followed him to the barn, her bare feet stinging on the gravel path. The air carried the scent of hay and leather, and the barn's red walls stood tall against the morning sky. Inside, James's horse, a sleek black stallion, eyed her with cold intelligence. Beside it stood a smaller mare, her coat a soft chestnut, her eyes calm and steady. "She is yours if you stay," James said, adjusting the saddle on his horse. "Name her what you like." Emily froze, her heart a wild thing in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" He paused, his hand still on the leather, and looked at her. "Because when I was 10, nobody did." The words hung between them, heavy with a story he did not tell. Emily approached the mare, her hand trembling as she touched its flank. She did not know how to ride well, but the mare stood patient as she climbed up, her legs awkward, her grip tight on the reins. James mounted his horse and led the way, his pace slow, letting her find her balance. The silence settled around them, not empty but full, like the space between notes in a song. They rode to the northern fence, where the land stretched wide, dotted with grazing cattle and wildflowers that swayed in the breeze. James dismounted and knelt by a post, showing her how to test its strength, how to spot rust on the wire, how to patch a break without cutting her hands. His instructions were clear, his tone even, as if he were teaching someone who belonged here. Emily listened, her fingers mimicking his movements, the work grounding her in a way she had never known. She was not a lost girl in this moment. She was someone with a purpose. On the ride back, the sun warmed her shoulders, and the mare's steady gait felt like an extension of her own will. Emily glanced at James, his hat tilted against the light, and found herself wondering about the man who had given her a horse, a room, a plate of eggs. What had he lost to make him stop for her? The question lingered, unspoken, as they returned to the ranch. That evening, after a supper of stew and cornbread, James sat by the fire, a leather-bound book in his hands. Emily watched from the doorway, her bare feet silent on the floor. He looked up, his eyes catching the flicker of the flames. "You got a last name?" he asked. She hesitated, the memory of her family's name bitter on her tongue. "I used to." "Do you want mine?" The offer stole her breath. A name was more than a word. It was a claim, a shield, a place in the world. She searched his face for a catch, but found only the same patience she had seen on the trail. "Can I?" she whispered. "It is not for sale," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But it is yours if you want to wear it. I am James Brooks." Emily's chest tightened, not with fear but with something new, something that felt like armor. "Brooks," she tested, the syllable foreign but solid. She nodded, her throat too full for words. James rose and crossed to a wooden chest in the corner, pulling out a small folded bundle wrapped in paper. "This was my sister's," he said, setting it on the table. "She died last winter. She would want it used." The bundle was a coat, its wool mended with careful stitches, its scent a faint mix of cedar and smoke. Emily reached for it, her fingers grazing the fabric. It was too big, but it looked warm, warmer than anything she had ever owned. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. He nodded, returning to his chair. It is yours if you need it. Emily pulled the coat over her shoulders, its weight grounding her against the flicker of the fire. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, or if this place, this man, this name would last. But for the first time, she felt counted. Not because someone said she mattered, but because someone believed she did without needing her story. The fire crackled, and outside the wind sang through the pines, carrying the promise of a home she might yet claim. The dawn broke crisp and golden, the kind of morning that made the world feel new. Emily woke to the creak of the ranch house settling, her body still unaccustomed to the softness of the quilt or the quiet that did not carry threats. She slipped into the mended coat James had given her, its sleeves swallowing her hands, and padded downstairs. James was already outside, hitching the wagon, his breath visible in the cool air. He glanced at her as she stepped onto the porch, her braid neat, her eyes wary but bright. "We are going to town," he said, securing the reins. "We will be back before dark. Do not worry." Emily nodded, though her stomach tightened. Town meant people, eyes, questions, things she had learned to dodge. She returned to her room and changed into the cleanest clothes from the stack James had provided. A simple dress, slightly too large, its hem brushing her ankles. She noticed a blue ribbon tucked among the folds, tied in a careful bow. James had not mentioned it, but its presence felt deliberate, like a gift he did not know how to name. She wove it into her braid, her fingers steady despite the flutter in her chest, and joined him at the wagon. The ride was long, the trail winding through hills dusted with sagebrush and wildflowers. James drove in silence, his hands steady on the reins, while Emily clutched the wagon's edge, her eyes tracing the horizon. The mare, whom she had named Clover, trotted behind, tied to the wagon, her calm presence a small anchor. As they neared the town, the air grew thick with the scents of sawdust and baking bread. Main Street stretched before them, a dusty ribbon lined with clapboard buildings, a mercantile, a livery, a saloon with swinging doors. Eyes followed them from porches and windows, sharp and curious, like hawks tracking a stranger in their territory. Emily shrank into the coat, her shoulders hunching. She was used to being ignored, not studied. James pulled the wagon to a stop outside the mercantile, its sign faded but proud. He handed Emily a small basket, its wicker smooth against her palm. "Get what you want," he said, his voice low. "Within reason." She stared at the basket, its emptiness a challenge. "For me?" He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Unless you think I wear lavender soap or eat peppermint sticks." Emily blinked, then let out a small, surprised laugh, the sound foreign to her own ears. It startled them both, a fleeting spark in the morning light. She followed James inside, the bell above the door jingling. The mercantile smelled of leather and molasses, its shelves stacked with bolts of fabric, tins of coffee, and jars of candy that gleamed like jewels. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, glanced up from his ledger, his gaze lingering on Emily. She tightened her grip on the basket, waiting for a question, a dismissal. None came. James nodded at the man, and the shopkeeper returned to his work. Emily moved through the aisles, her steps tentative, as if the shelves might reject her touch. She chose a bar of soap, its scent soft and floral, and a small bag of peppermint sticks, their red and white stripes bright against the burlap. Her fingers hesitated over a book of pressed flowers, its cover worn but beautiful. She glanced at James, who was examining a coil of rope. He caught her eye and nodded once, a silent permission. She added the book to her basket, her heart quickening with a feeling she could not name. Agency, perhaps, or the simple thrill of being seen. At the counter, James added a spool of thread, a brush, and a tin of biscuits to her pile. "For her," he said to the shopkeeper, his tone matter-of-fact. The man nodded, his expression softening, and wrapped the items in brown paper. Emily stood close to James, the basket heavy in her arms, her braids swinging as she turned to leave. The bell jingled again as they stepped outside, the sunlight sharp after the dim store. They crossed the street, the wagon creaking under their supplies, when two women near the livery paused their conversation. One, her hair pinned tightly beneath a bonnet, raised her chin, her eyes narrowing as they settled on Emily. "Yours?" she asked James, her voice sharp with curiosity. Emily stiffened, her fingers tightening around the paper-wrapped parcel. She braced for James to deflect, to explain her as a stray or a temporary burden. Instead, he met the woman's gaze, his expression unyielding. "She is now." The words landed like a thunderclap, steady and sure. The woman blinked, her companion nudging her arm, and they turned away, their whispers trailing like smoke. Emily's throat tightened, not with fear, but with something warmer, something that felt like roots taking hold. She glanced at James, but he was already moving toward the wagon, his boots stirring the dust. He did not need to say more. His defense was not for the women. It was for her. The ride home was quieter, the town's hum fading into the rhythm of hooves and the rustle of wind through the pines. Emily held the parcel in her lap, the book of flowers pressed against her chest. The ribbon in her hair caught the light, a small defiance against the eyes that had judged her. She stole a glance at James, his profile sharp against the setting sun, and found herself wondering about the sister whose coat she wore, the loss that had carved the lines in his face. He had called her his, not out of duty, but out of choice. The weight of that choice settled in her chest, heavy but not crushing, like the name she now carried. They reached the ranch as dusk painted the sky in purples and golds. James unhitched the wagon while Emily carried her parcel inside, the soap and peppermint sticks a quiet promise of permanence. She set the book on her bedside table, its pages whispering of fields she might one day know by heart. Clover snorted softly in the barn, and the house creaked as James lit the stove. Emily stood at her window, the coat draped over her shoulders, and watched the stars emerge. The town's whispers could not reach her here. Not yet. But she felt them, a distant hum, like the first notes of a storm gathering on the horizon. The afternoon sun hung heavy over the ranch, its light pooling in the pasture where clover bloomed in defiant bursts of purple. Emily stood by the barn, brushing Clover's chestnut coat, the mare's steady breaths a rhythm she could lean into. 3 weeks had passed since the town visit, each day weaving her deeper into the ranch's pulse. The creak of the porch at dawn, the scent of James's coffee, the weight of his sister's coat across her shoulders. She was no longer a shadow slipping through the world. She was Emily Brooks, a name that felt less like a gift and more like a truth she had earned. Yet, as she worked, a prickle of unease stirred, like the air before a storm. The sound came first, hooves, not the familiar cadence of James's stallion, but a stranger's gait, sharp and purposeful. Emily paused, her hand tightening on the brush, and squinted toward the horizon. A rider emerged, dust trailing behind him like a warning. He was lean, sun-worn, his hat low over eyes that scanned the land with a hunger she recognized, not for food, but for something owed. Clover snorted, sensing her tension, and Emily stepped forward, her bare feet firm against the earth. She was not running. Not anymore. The man dismounted, his boots stirring the dry grass, and leaned against the fence post like he already owned it. "Looking for James Brooks," he said, his voice dry as gravel, laced with a confidence that made her skin prickle. "He is in the far field," Emily said, pointing toward the northern ridge. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. "Who are you?" "Name's Nathan Carter." He tipped his hat, a gesture more habit than courtesy. "Reckon he'll remember my father." Emily studied him, noting the creased deed clutched in his hand, its edges yellowed but sharp. She did not answer, only nodded and turned back to Clover, brushing with deliberate calm. Nathan lingered, his gaze heavy, assessing her like a ledger entry. He did not speak again, just mounted his horse and rode toward the field, leaving a trail of dust that hung in the air like a threat. James returned at dusk, his face unreadable as he led his stallion to the barn. Nathan followed, the deed now tucked into his jacket. Emily watched from the porch, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress as the men spoke in low tones near the fence. James's shoulders were stiff, his hands steady but deliberate, like a man bracing for a fight. Nathan's voice carried fragments: Eastern pasture, old claim, legal right. Each word a stone dropped into the quiet she had begun to trust. When Nathan finally rode off, the sky was bruised with twilight, and James's silence was heavier than the hoofbeats fading into the distance. Inside, James lit the lantern, its glow casting shadows across the kitchen. Emily sat at the table, the book of pressed flowers open before her, though she could not focus on its pages. "What did he want?" she asked, her voice low, afraid of the answer. James poured coffee, his movements slow. "The Eastern pasture. Says his father owned it years ago before my sister and I bought the land. He has a deed, but it is old, likely expired." Emily's throat tightened. The Eastern pasture was where Clover grazed, where she had learned to mend fences, where the wildflowers bloomed brightest. It was hers, or so James had said. "Can he take it?" James met her gaze, his eyes steady but shadowed. "Not easily. The law favors those who work the land, not those who show up with paper. But he will try. Men like him always do." She nodded, her fingers tracing the book's worn cover. The ranch had become her anchor, its routines a shield against the past. The thought of losing even a piece of it felt like losing herself again. "What do we do?" "We wait," James said, setting his cup down. "And we fight, if it comes to that." The word fight settled in her chest, sharp and unfamiliar. She had never fought for anything, only survived. But the ranch, James, the name Brooks, they were worth more than survival. She looked at him, his face etched with lines of loss and resolve, and felt a spark of her own determination kindle. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay beneath the quilt, the coat folded at the bed's foot, and listened to the house's quiet creaks. A floorboard groaned downstairs, and she stiffened, her breath catching. It was only James, she told herself, but the unease lingered. She rose, her bare feet silent, and crept to the hallway. A faint light spilled from the den where James sat at his roll-top desk, a stack of papers before him. She paused in the shadows, watching as he unfolded a letter, its handwriting neat and unfamiliar. "This was my sister's will," he said without looking up, his voice low as if he sensed her presence. "She owned half this ranch. In it, she wrote that if I ever found someone with her spirit, they were welcome to her share." Emily stepped into the light, her heart pounding. "But I am not blood." He tapped the paper, his eyes meeting hers. "It does not say anything about blood, only heart." He handed her the letter, and for a moment she hesitated, afraid of what it might mean. When she took it, her fingers trembled, the paper heavy with a promise she had never dared imagine. It was not about land or money. It was about a woman she had never met believing in a love that could be given, not just inherited. James pulled out a smaller envelope, her name, Emily Brooks, written in block letters across it. "This makes you guardian of the Eastern pasture," he said. "It is not everything, but it is yours." Emily held the envelope, its weight more than paper, more than a lifetime. "Why are you doing this?" James leaned back, his arms folded. "Because someday, when I am gone, I want this land in the hands of someone who knows what it means to be unwanted and chooses differently." The words struck deep, breaking a wall she had not known still stood. She could not speak, could only clutch the envelope as the lantern's flame danced in the corner. James stood, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You have time," he said, "to decide who you want to be. But for now, this is your place." Emily nodded, her throat too full for words. She returned to her room, the letter and envelope tucked beneath her pillow, and lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The eastern pasture was hers, not just a gift, but a responsibility. Nathan Carter's shadow loomed, his deed a blade held over her future. Yet for the first time she felt not fear, but a quiet resolve. The ranch was her home, and she would fight for it, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The morning sky hung low, heavy with clouds that pressed against the hills like a warning. Emily woke to the scent of rain on the wind, her dreams fragmented with images of hoofbeats and yellowed paper. She pulled on the oversized coat, its wool a familiar weight, and descended the stairs. James was already gone, his note on the kitchen table brief. Gone to town for supplies. Back by dusk. The house felt too quiet, its creaks amplified by his absence. Emily fed Clover, her hands steady as she worked, but her eyes kept drifting to the eastern pasture where the wildflowers swayed under the gathering storm. She was mending a broken rake in the barn when the sound came again. Hooves, multiple this time, their rhythm sharp and unyielding. Emily set the rake down, her pulse quickening, and climbed to the loft for a better view. 3 riders approached, their silhouettes stark against the gray sky. Nathan Carter led them, his hat tilted low, flanked by 2 men whose broad shoulders and grim faces marked them as hired muscle. James was not here. The realization hit her like a stone, but panic did not follow. She had survived abandonment, silence, hunger. She could survive this. Emily descended the ladder, her movements deliberate, and tied her braid tight, the blue ribbon a small defiance. She stepped onto the porch as the riders dismounted, their boots churning the dust. Nathan's eyes found her, sharp and calculating, a predator sizing up prey. The other men hung back, their hands resting on belts that carried no tools, only weight. "Thought I would talk to the girl wearing a man's title like it fits," Nathan said, his voice smooth but edged with mockery. He nodded toward the pasture. "You have something that belongs to my family." Emily stood tall, her bare feet rooted to the porch. The eastern pasture stretched behind her, its clover and wildflowers a map of every moment she had claimed as her own. The fences she had mended, the horse she had named, the name she now carried. She thought of James's quiet faith, the envelope beneath her pillow, the sister's will that spoke of heart, not blood. Nathan's deed might hold paper, but this land held her. "It is already mine," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the wind. Nathan chuckled, a sound that carried no warmth. "You really think you can hold it?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the porch. "Walk away now, and I will not make trouble." The men behind him shifted, their eyes cold, their presence a silent threat. Emily's heart pounded, but her mind was sharp, mapping the space around her, the barn to her left, the open field to her right, the door behind her. She thought of the shotgun James kept, leaned against the wall inside, its weight familiar from the times he had shown her how to hold it, how to stand firm. She had never fired it, but she knew its power, and she knew Nathan would see it in her eyes. "I do not think," she said, stepping back toward the door. "I know." She reached inside, her movements swift but steady, and lifted the shotgun, holding it low, not aimed, just present. The wood was cool against her palms, the barrel heavy with purpose. Nathan's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. The men behind him froze, their hands twitching but not drawing. "You are bluffing," Nathan said, his voice tight. "Maybe," Emily replied, her gaze unwavering. But are you ready to find out? The air thickened, the storm's first rumble rolling over the hills. Emily stood firm, the shotgun a line she would not cross unless forced. She saw the pasture in her mind, the place where she had learned to be more than a burden, where James had trusted her to carry his sister's legacy. Nathan wanted the land for its worth. She wanted it for its meaning. That difference made her stronger than his hired fists, sharper than his deed. A long pause stretched, the wind whistling through the pines. Then, slowly, Nathan stepped back, his jaw tight. "This is not over," he muttered, swinging into his saddle. "It is for you," Emily said, her voice steady as stone. The men followed, their horses snorting as they turned down the trail. No shots fired, no curses hurled, just the fading thud of hooves and the dust settling in their wake. Emily lowered the shotgun, her arms trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she had done. She had not just defended the land, she had defended herself, her place, her name. The rain began as she returned the shotgun to its place, fat drops pattering against the porch. Emily sat on the steps, the coat pulled tight around her, and watched the storm sweep across the pasture. The wildflowers bent but did not break, and neither had she. When James returned at dusk, his wagon creaking under the weight of supplies, he found her still on the porch, the rain a soft curtain around her. He dismounted, his eyes taking in her face, the empty road, the quiet that spoke louder than words. "Something happened?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, her braid damp against her back. "They came. I handled it." James studied her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a flicker of something crossed his face. Pride, perhaps, or relief. He sat beside her, the porch creaking under his weight, and looked out at the rain-soaked pasture. "Told you it was yours," he said. Emily did not reply, not with words. She leaned into the silence, letting it settle like the storm, a quiet that belonged to someone who had faced a threat and stood taller for it. The eastern pasture gleamed under the fading light, its boundaries unbroken, its heart hers to hold. Nathan Carter's shadow might linger, but it could not touch her now. She was Emily Brooks, and this was her home. The morning sky hung low, heavy with clouds that pressed against the hills like a warning. Emily woke to the scent of rain on the wind, her dreams fragmented with images of hoofbeats and yellowed paper. She pulled on the oversized coat, its wool a familiar weight, and descended the stairs. James was already gone, his note on the kitchen table brief. Gone to town for supplies, back by dusk. The house felt too quiet, its creaks amplified by his absence. Emily fed Clover, her hands steady as she worked, but her eyes kept drifting to the eastern pasture, where the wildflowers swayed under the gathering storm. She was mending a broken rake in the barn when the sound came again. Hooves, multiple this time, their rhythm sharp and unyielding. Emily set the rake down, her pulse quickening, and climbed to the loft for a better view. 3 riders approached, their silhouettes stark against the gray sky. Nathan Carter led them, his hat tilted low, flanked by 2 men whose broad shoulders and grim faces marked them as hired muscle. James was not here. The realization hit her like a stone, but panic did not follow. She had survived abandonment, silence, hunger. She could survive this. Emily descended the ladder, her movements deliberate, and tied her braid tight, the blue ribbon a small defiance. She stepped onto the porch as the riders dismounted, their boots churning the dust. Nathan's eyes found her, sharp and calculating, a predator sizing up prey. The other men hung back, their hands resting on belts that carried no tools, only weight. "Thought I would talk to the girl wearing a man's title like it fits," Nathan said, his voice smooth but edged with mockery. He nodded toward the pasture. "You have something that belongs to my family." Emily stood tall, her bare feet rooted to the porch. The eastern pasture stretched behind her, its clover and wildflowers a map of every moment she had claimed as her own. The fences she had mended, the horse she had named, the name she now carried. She thought of James's quiet faith, the envelope beneath her pillow, the sister's will that spoke of heart, not blood. Nathan's deed might hold paper, but this land held her. "It is already mine," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the wind. Nathan chuckled, a sound that carried no warmth. "You really think you can hold it?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the porch. "Walk away now, and I will not make trouble." The men behind him shifted, their eyes cold, their presence a silent threat. Emily's heart pounded, but her mind was sharp, mapping the space around her, the barn to her left, the open field to her right, the door behind her. She thought of the shotgun James kept leaned against the wall inside, its weight familiar from the times he had shown her how to hold it, how to stand firm. She had never fired it, but she knew its power, and she knew Nathan would see it in her eyes. "I do not think," she said, stepping back toward the door. "I know." She reached inside, her movements swift but steady, and lifted the shotgun, holding it low, not aimed, just present. The wood was cool against her palms, the barrel heavy with purpose. Nathan's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. The men behind him froze, their hands twitching but not drawing. "You are bluffing," Nathan said, his voice tight. "Maybe," Emily replied, her gaze unwavering. "But are you ready to find out?" The air thickened, the storm's first rumble rolling over the hills. Emily stood firm, the shotgun a line she would not cross unless forced. She saw the pasture in her mind, the place where she had learned to be more than a burden, where James had trusted her to carry his sister's legacy. Nathan wanted the land for its worth. She wanted it for its meaning. That difference made her stronger than his hired fists, sharper than his deed. A long pause stretched, the wind whistling through the pines. Then, slowly, Nathan stepped back, his jaw tight. "This is not over," he muttered, swinging into his saddle. "It is for you," Emily said, her voice steady as stone. The men followed, their horses snorting as they turned down the trail. No shots fired, no curses hurled, just the fading thud of hooves and the dust settling in their wake. Emily lowered the shotgun, her arms trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she had done. She had not just defended the land, she had defended herself, her place, her name. The rain began as she returned the shotgun to its place, fat drops pattering against the porch. Emily sat on the steps, the coat pulled tight around her, and watched the storm sweep across the pasture. The wildflowers bent but did not break, and neither had she. When James returned at dusk, his wagon creaking under the weight of supplies, he found her still on the porch, the rain a soft curtain around her. He dismounted, his eyes taking in her face, the empty road, the quiet that spoke louder than words. "Something happened?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, her braid damp against her back. "They came. I handled it." James studied her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a flicker of something crossed his face, pride, perhaps, or relief. He sat beside her, the porch creaking under his weight, and looked out at the rain-soaked pasture. "Told you it was yours," he said. Emily did not reply, not with words. She leaned into the silence, letting it settle like the storm, a quiet that belonged to someone who had faced a threat and stood taller for it. The eastern pasture gleamed under the fading light, its boundaries unbroken, its heart hers to hold. Nathan Carter's shadow might linger, but it could not touch her now. She was Emily Brooks, and this was her home. Autumn swept across the ranch like a second chance, its crisp air laced with the scent of pine and possibility. Emily woke before dawn, not out of necessity but desire, her hands eager to light the stove and greet the day. The house hummed with new sounds: Lucas's soft snores from the cot in the den, the clink of James's coffee mug, the laughter that spilled across the yard as chores began. The eastern pasture bloomed thick with feed, the barn stood stacked with hay, and the ranch, once a silent refuge, now echoed with the pulse of a family forged not by blood, but by choice. Emily stood on the porch, her braid woven with the blue ribbon, the coat draped over her shoulders despite the morning's warmth. Clover grazed in the distance, her chestnut coat gleaming, while Lucas chased a stray chicken, his boots, new, bought from the mercantile, kicking up dust. The wooden horse she had whittled for him peeked from his pocket, a talisman of trust. James joined her, a folded paper in his hand, his face calm but purposeful. "It is time," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of a promise kept. She met his gaze, her heart steady. "You are adopting me?" He nodded, the paper crinkling in his grip. "If you will have me." Emily looked down at her hands, once trembling when asked her name, now stained with dirt, ink, and care. "I thought I already did," she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips. They rode to town together, Lucas perched in the wagon's back, clutching the reins of Clover, who trotted behind. The trail wound through hills gilded with autumn light, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Main Street bustled with its usual rhythm, horses clopping, shopkeepers sweeping porches, but the eyes that followed them held no suspicion now, only curiosity, even respect. Emily sat tall, the coat's weight grounding her, the name Brooks a shield she wore with pride. At the clerk's office, a narrow room smelling of ink and old wood, James spread the adoption papers on the counter. The clerk, a balding man with ink-stained fingers, raised an eyebrow but said nothing as James signed with a calm that seemed to still the air. Emily stood beside him, her hands clasped, her breath catching as the clerk read the name aloud. Emily Brooks. The sound struck her like a bell, clear and true. She flinched, then smiled, not because it made her someone new, but because it told the truth of who she had become. The clerk stamped the papers, his nod one of quiet approval. "It is official," he said, handing the documents to James. "She is yours." James folded the papers, his eyes meeting Emily's. "She always was." They stepped outside, the sunlight sharp, the town's hum a distant chorus. Lucas waited by the wagon, his eyes bright with questions he did not ask. Emily ruffled his hair, the gesture natural now, and climbed onto the wagon's seat. The ride home was quiet, the kind of quiet that held no fear, only the promise of a future they would shape together. Lucas hummed a tune, his voice small but steady, and Emily felt the weight of the papers in James's coat pocket, a tether to the life they had built. Back at the ranch, James called them to the front gate, a sturdy arch of oak that marked the boundary between the trail and their world. He held a chisel and a plank of wood, its surface smooth, waiting. "We need a new sign," he said, his voice steady. "One that tells the truth." Emily took the chisel, her hands sure, and carved her name first. Emily Brooks. The letters were uneven, but they stood bold against the grain. Lucas followed, his small hands guided by James, etching Lucas with careful strokes. James carved his own name last. James Brooks, the lines deep and certain. They painted the letters in black, the color stark against the wood, and nailed the plank above the gate. It swayed slightly in the breeze, a declaration to anyone who passed. This was their place, their family, their home. That evening, Emily sat on the porch, a mug of cider warming her hands. Lucas played near the barn, his laughter mingling with the cluck of chickens, while James mended a harness by the fire's light. The ranch stretched before her, its pastures glowing under the moon, the wildflowers a testament to roots that held fast. She thought of the trail, the crumbs, the silence where her name had once lived. That girl was gone. Not erased, but transformed. Her scars now part of a story she told with pride. Neighbors came by in the days that followed, not with questions, but with offers. A basket of eggs, a bundle of fence wire, a request to buy some of the ranch's hens. The schoolteacher stopped to ask if Emily and Lucas might join her classes, her smile warm, unprying. No one asked, "Where did she come from?" They asked, "How did you teach her to ride like that?" Or, "Can you spare some of that clover seed?" Emily answered with a quiet confidence, her voice no longer a whisper but a steady thread in the ranch's tapestry. She rose each morning to light the stove, to check the fences, to teach Lucas how to mend a trough or soothe a skittish horse. The eastern pasture remained hers, its guardianship a promise she carried not as a burden, but as a gift. Nathan Carter's shadow had faded, his deed nullified, his threat a memory that no longer stung. The ranch was whole, its heart beating in the hands of those who had chosen it, and each other. As winter crept closer, Emily stood by the gate one evening, her coat wrapped tight against the chill. The plank above her bore their names, a vow etched in wood and time. She traced the letters with her fingers, their edges rough but enduring. Being left did not define her. Being chosen did not define her. What did was what she had built, what she had chosen, and who had chosen her back. The stars burned bright above, and for the first time Emily did not fear the dark. It was hers, too, a canvas for the life she would write. She turned back to the house, where James's lantern glowed, and Lucas's laughter spilled through the open door. The trail no longer called her name. She had found her place, and it was here, in the heart of a family that had grown from 1 to 3, bound not by blood, but by love that refused to walk away. Deserted girl, wandering the trail. Then the richest cowboy gave her a home.